Was having a happy Monday to everybody out there. Thanks for joining us as always. It is much appreciated. Before we do anything, let's get started with a $50 super chat from our friend Terry Grant. She drops a $50 super chat in saying, super chat to celebrate the Chiefs getting squashed. Sorry to miss live, but still fighting my knee in physical therapy. Again, we wish you well, Terry. Speedy recovery. Keep hammering out that physical therapy, and you will be as good as new in no time. Appreciate the $50 super chat to get this week started, to get this podcast started. Thank you, Terry. It is very, very much appreciated. All right, before we get to the Chiefs, the Eagles, this ridiculous quote-unquote debate that was happening about Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, especially late last week, we've got some news. Chuks Okorafor is going to be released by the Patriots. This is not shocking. After what happened last year, he decided to leave the team. It was deemed a mental health issue from some people, including Phil Perry, my friend. So it looks like Okorafor is out the door. Field Yates of ESPN reports that Okorafor actually wants to continue his NFL career. So it looks like Okorafor is ready to come back to the NFL. We'll see what happens with him, but he will not be a New England Patriot. I'm sure that does not bother many of you, if any of you. All right. Now that that is put aside or put to the back, let's get to the true story. Now, the media, hopefully, and when I say media, I mean national media, some local media, but the media in general, hopefully the sports media in general can relax for another, 2 or 3 years, at least. At least. Let's hope they can all relax for the next 2 or 3 years and stop with the ridiculous Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady stuff. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I first have to admit I was wrong. I had it wrong. I told all of you that I thought that the Super Bowl was going to be a great game. I said this on Crafts and Kickoffs on Thursday night. I thought it was going to be a great game. I thought Kansas City was going to win that game. I talked about it yesterday on 98.5 The Sports Hub, and I was dead ass wrong. It was a brutal game. It stunk out loud. The Chiefs did not even really compete in that game last night. The Eagles dominated from the beginning to the end. That was a smoke show. That was a butt whooping. That was a mollywhopping. It was a disaster for Kansas City. So I was wrong. The game stunk and the Chiefs lost. So I raise my hand and I take responsibility for being wrong on my prediction. But I can't say that I was upset about being wrong last night. I actually enjoyed the Super Bowl. I enjoyed the throttling that we saw the Chiefs get. Mostly because of this absolutely ridiculous debate, if you want to call it that. Now, I didn't discuss this last week. I didn't get into it last week because, frankly, I thought the Mahomes-Brady GOAT conversation, it's really been happening the last couple of years. I just find that conversation to be forced. And if I'm going to sit there and talk about it, I feel like I'm being disingenuous because I don't believe that it's a debate. I don't believe it's a competition right now. And I said this yesterday on 98.5 The Sports Hub. If you listen to the show, I was live 2 to 5 solo yesterday, and I talked about it. I find this entire conversation to be embellished, to be fabricated, to be disingenuous. And I found it. If you want to have the conversation about Brady or Mahomes being the GOAT, that's your deal. If you want to do it, if a talk show host wants to do it, if a radio personality wants to do it, if somebody on TV wants to do it, that's their own prerogative. I'm not telling you. I'm not telling other people how to do their job. They do the job they want to do. I'm just telling you from my point of view, I had no interest in talking about Brady versus Mahomes, the GOAT battle last week because I just didn't buy into it. I think it's a waste of time. But then something happened late in the week. Not only did some people want to have that conversation, Brady versus Mahomes, who's the GOAT? Some people tried to tell me that if Mahomes won the game last night, that he was the GOAT, that he somehow, some way surpassed Brady in what he did. Even though if Mahomes won last night, it would be only his 4th ring compared to 7 rings for Brady. Even though Brady walked into that game last night as the color commentator, having more than twice the playoff victories that Mahomes has, Stephen A. Smith, Austin Mock of The Athletic, and some other people try to tell you that if Mahomes won that game last night, he was the GOAT. And some people went as far as telling you and I that not only Mahomes was the GOAT if he won last night, it was clear cut. There wasn't even a case for Tom Brady. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And last night is the reason why all of it was ridiculous. And last night is the reason why I don't get into these GOAT debates between Mahomes and Brady. Because what happened last night? Last night, Patrick Mahomes was awful. He was atrocious. He was terrible. He was horrific. He was embarrassing. And we don't know what's going to happen. We have no idea what's going to happen in the next 10 years. We don't know if last night was the last Super Bowl Patrick Mahomes will ever play in. Now, it's probably unlikely. Mahomes might end up playing in another 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 Super Bowls. Mahomes might end up winning another 5 Super Bowls and surpass Brady's 7 rings. But we have no idea what's going to happen the next 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. It's possible that last night was the last trip to the big game for Patrick. It's possible. Not likely, possible. It's possible Mahomes gets to other Super Bowls and never finds a way to win another one for the rest of his NFL career. Again, unlikely, but not impossible. So this idea of having the conversation so early, way too prematurely to have this conversation after a guy has 3 rings and is going to his 5th Super Bowl, to compare him to somebody who had played in twice the amount of Super Bowls that he had played in. It was outrageous. It was ridiculous. It was clickbait. It was trying to establish engagement online. That's what I think. That's how I see that kind of a conversation. When I see somebody having a quote-unquote debate about Mahomes versus Brady, greatest of all time, I find that to be insulting to the viewer, to the listener, because I don't think many people, if you look at it reasonably, if you look at it with common sense, would ever say the guy who has less than half the rings and half the playoff victories as the other guy somehow, some way is even close to reaching that kind of pinnacle. It's hilarious to me. And so that's why we didn't talk about it last week. But let's talk about it today. Because today, after last night's whooping, today, Tom Brady has more than 2 times the rings than Patrick Mahomes. He has more than 2 times the playoff wins than Mahomes. And we can safely say that Tom Brady never had a Super Bowl performance like Mahomes had last night. And don't get it twisted. Take the garbage yards and the garbage time touchdown, throw it out, throw it in the garbage, because that's exactly what it was. Mahomes' stats look a heck of a lot better than the way he actually played last night. Through 3 quarters of that football game last night, Mahomes literally looked lost. He looked lost. He looked like one of the worst quarterbacks in football in the first half. And that's not hyperbolic. That's the truth. He looked like one of the worst quarterbacks in the first half that I've seen play this year. He was all over the place. And we had never seen Tom Brady. He had a bad first half against the Falcons, as we know, to go down 28-3. But we have never seen Tom Brady in the biggest game look the way Mahomes looked for 3.5 quarters last night. We have never seen that from Brady. No matter who he was facing, no matter how tough the pass rush was, no matter how many injuries he was dealing with on the rest of the team or himself, we never saw Brady look like that. That was inexcusable. That was awful. I've got a lot more thoughts. Before we get to those thoughts, don't forget to help us out. Click that thumbs up while you watch on YouTube and listen. That helps drive the algorithm. Clicking the thumbs up. More likes means more eyeballs. Don't forget to throw a comment in. Did you enjoy last night's game? Are you happy now that we can put to rest this greatest of all time conversation, at least for the next couple of years, between Brady and Mahomes? I'm thrilled. It alleviates so much BS. Are you thrilled? Don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, and don't forget to subscribe. We're less than 150 subscriptions away from 6,000. That's the goal. We want to hit it from a month from now, right? We want to hit that 6,000 subscriber goal within the next month. We want to be at 6,000 subscribers by the time NFL free agency begins. The tampering period begins on March 10th. That's a month from today. So continue to like, continue to comment, continue to subscribe so we can hit that 6,000 number and build this community one step at a time. I appreciate everybody who watches, everybody who listens, everybody who supports this podcast. Spotify, Apple Pods, not leaving you out. Rate and review. You can help us out at those two places as well. All right, before I get to more on Brady and Mahomes, Justin TF Patriot, $5 super chat. Thank you, Justin. Funny, Brady needed 7 for some to call him the GOAT over Montana, yet Mahomes only needs 4 apparently. Some even say he already took the title. Yeah, Justin, I'm not believing it. And I don't think those people are saying that this morning and early this afternoon and today, and I don't think people are going to say that this week. I think last night's game, how bad Mahomes played, it unequivocally takes him out of the conversation for now. I don't think there's any argument. I didn't think there was any argument before last night, so you know how I feel. But even the people who were trying to peddle this thought that Mahomes was the GOAT, or if he won last night, he would surpass Brady as the GOAT, the greatest playoff quarterback of all time. That was something that Austin Mock of The Athletic wrote. I don't think any of those people could sit there with a straight face and argue today that Mahomes is on the brink of being the greatest of all time. As a matter of fact, I saw Stephen A. Smith this morning, not really surprised by it, but I saw Stephen A. reverse course and say that the GOAT conversation was over. So before the game, Mahomes could have become the GOAT with that one win. After last night, case closed, never again to be spoken of. But hey, shout out to Stephen A. He's going to make like $20 million a year on his next contract with ESPN, so he's doing something right. But I don't think anybody is going to argue that anymore. Not after last night, Justin. Appreciate the 5, appreciate the super chat. All right, let's look into this. Let's just look at the biggest game that these guys have played, right? Brady and Mahomes. Let's look at the Super Bowl stats. Brady is 7-3. He's completed 65.8% of his passes. Patrick Mahomes is 3-2. He's completed 65.3% of his passes. So, similar completion percentage. Obviously, Brady, 7 wins out of 10 games. Mahomes, 3 wins out of 5 games. But the difference truly is touchdowns and interceptions. Now, of course, if you look at Brady, he's played 5 more Super Bowls than Mahomes has played, so he's going to have more touchdowns. Brady has 21 touchdowns. Mahomes has 10. But look at the interceptions. Again, Brady has played in twice as many Super Bowls as Patrick Mahomes, yet he has less interceptions than Mahomes has in Super Bowl play. Brady has 6 interceptions. 6 interceptions in his 10 Super Bowls. Mahomes has 7 picks in his 5 Super Bowls. Let's not forget that Brady has the comeback against Atlanta, down 28-3. Let's not forget about that ridiculous fourth quarter against Seattle when Brady completed 13 of 15 passes and threw 2 touchdowns and looked like the greatest quarterback on the planet because that's exactly who he was. That tremendous fourth quarter against the Seahawks. Everybody talks about Malcolm Butler and the pick in the end zone for obvious reasons. But that play doesn't happen. That play doesn't matter if Tom Brady doesn't go on an absolute heater in the fourth quarter against that Seattle secondary, against that Seattle defense. In Mahomes, his statistics are helped by the garbage time last night. That late touchdown, the last 2 touchdowns, you could argue, it was garbage time. Before the last 2 touchdowns, when Philly couldn't care less, frankly, the second touchdown was against their backups, their second and third stringers, for the love of God. Before those 2 touchdowns, we would be talking about Patrick Mahomes in his 5 Super Bowls having 8 touchdowns and 7 picks. Think about that for a minute. 8 touchdowns and 7 picks before garbage time took over last night. And some people were trying to have this conversation that he was going to surpass Brady with a win last night. What a joke. Pete Pretorius, $5 super chat. Thank you, Pete. True Super Bowl MVP was the Philadelphia defensive line. There's no doubt There's no doubt, Pete, and you lead me to my next point. Last night, and I appreciate the 5, last night was the perfect example of a 4-down front getting home to the quarterback without having the need to blitz. And it was very similar to what the Giants did to Brady, especially back in 2007, right? Having that 4-man front. I think they called it the NASCAR front or whatever. The Giants had 4 guys on that defensive line that absolutely cooked the Patriots offensive line over and over and over again. That is how they were able to slow down Randy Moss and Welker and Brady and not allow the Patriots to have that perfect season. It's because they had 4 guys on that defensive front that could get to the quarterback. They did not have to blitz. So that pass rush with 4 consistently getting home, that was the difference maker last night. Couple of statistics. Seth Walder had this post on the pressure. The Eagles blitzed Mahomes 0 times last night. Not one blitz from Philadelphia. Mahomes is the 6th quarterback in Super Bowl history to not be blitzed a single time. All 6 of those quarterbacks lost in the Super Bowl. If you can get pressure on the quarterback without blitzing, it's going to be very difficult for that quarterback to consistently make plays. At halftime, this is from Burt Breer. At halftime last night, total yards. The Eagles had 179 total yards at halftime. The Chiefs had 23. 23 yards in the first half. Brutal. Yards per play, the Chiefs were just over a yard per play at 1.2. The Eagles were at 4.6. At the half, the Eagles had 13 first downs. The Chiefs had 1 first down. I mean, this was just an all-out whooping. Michael Hurley at halftime posted about Patrick Mahomes. At halftime, Mahomes was 6 for 14, had 33 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. His passer rating was 10.7. Again, this is not hyperbolic. Patrick Mahomes, through 3 quarters of that game last night, had one of the worst games that I've seen a quarterback have in the Super Bowl. For a guy who is the best quarterback, most talented quarterback for the last several years, for that guy to play that way. I know he didn't have a great game against Tampa and Brady a few years back, but last night, that was a special kind of ugly. First half of football, he's 6 for 14, no touchdowns, 2 picks, 33 passing yards in the first half, a passer rating that was under 11. And this wasn't just the pressure eventually getting to Mahomes. I thought on the first drive, Mahomes was bad. He had Travis Kelce open on 3rd down. He threw behind him. He threw behind him and low. He had Kelce open later and threw it pretty much right in the dirt. Mahomes was all over the place. The pressure made it worse. There's no doubt. But even early in this game, it looked like Mahomes, his accuracy was off. He didn't look right. And he just played an awful football game. There's no other way to put it. He played an awful football game. Vitalix with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Vitalix. Brady losing while having 500 passing yards, a 115 passer rating while Mahomes gets embarrassed in both his losses. Brady never puked on himself on the big stage. Disrespectful. Thank you, Eagles. It's true. I mean, we can, as I said earlier, we've never seen Tom Brady look like that in a Super Bowl for 3 quarters, 3.5 quarters. We've never seen that. He had a rough go of it in the first half against Atlanta, and we all know how that ended. We've never seen Brady against starters look that way in a Super Bowl for 3 quarters, 3.5 quarters. Mahomes was terrible last night. We just haven't seen it. And yeah, Brady losing to the Eagles. Talk about that a little bit later. Even though he threw for an NFL record, 505 yards against Philly in that Super Bowl. Yeah, Bill should have played Butler. We all agree, right? The one question I have about the Chiefs, beyond Patrick Mahomes, is actually for Andy Reid. I don't know why Andy Reid did not move the pocket more. We finally saw it in like the fourth quarter. It was either the fourth quarter or late third quarter when Mahomes took the snap and he rolled to his right. I don't know why we did not see more of that early in that game. That was mystifying to me. Reid kept calling for Mahomes to drop back and sit in the pocket, and his offensive line was getting dusted consistently. Mahomes was just chilling there. I mean, he was just waiting to get smoked on a number of those snaps. So I don't really know why Andy Reid did not adjust. He didn't look at this and say, man, my quarterback is getting all sorts of heat. I've got to move the pocket. I've got to do something, right? I've got to utilize Mahomes and his mobility, his athleticism, and get him into some rollouts. Get him to try to get away from that pressure. We didn't see a lot of that. And there was a lack of pre-snap creativity, I thought, from Andy Reid and the Chiefs. I thought they could have done some different things to try to, combat that pass rush, and they really didn't. It was Mahomes stepping back in the pocket over and over and over again, getting smashed. So that was interesting to me. But even when you look at the pressure, even when you look at the game last night and you try to compare it to the Giants against Brady, because as I said, I was having some flashbacks to Kansas City against Tampa a few years ago when the defensive front kept getting at Mahomes. And I also had flashbacks to 2007 when the Pats couldn't finish that perfect season, when the Giants defensive line was just making life miserable. And he kept, coming after Brady. Even in those games, even against the Giants, in those two games for Brady, he didn't have Gronkowski in the second one, as we know. I mean, Gronk was out there, but he was on one leg. And the first game, very similar to what happened last night. Brady in those two games against the Giants, he still completed 63% of his passes, had 3 touchdowns, and only threw 1 pick. So even though the Giants defense was getting after Brady, Brady didn't fall apart. Brady wasn't a complete mess. Mahomes was a complete mess last night. He was not competitive. You look at QBR. This is from Seth Walder. Jalen Hurts last night had a 75.4 QBR. Patrick Mahomes had an 11.4 QBR. That is the second lowest of his entire career. What we saw last night in that Super Bowl with a chance to three-peat and put his name in the history books, what we saw last night from Mahomes, according to QBR, was the second worst start, the second worst game of his NFL career. In his biggest moment, that's the biggest game of Mahomes' life. And he had the second worst game of his career. You can't say that about Brady. Not even close. Brady's 3 losses in the Super Bowl, he lost by a combined 15 points. Last night, Mahomes lost by 18 points. 3 losses combined for Brady, a total of 15 points. Mahomes, last night, his team lost by 18, and it was 26 before that garbage time, long touchdown, and 2-point conversion against the Eagles' backups. It was even worse than that. And I thought for a while it was going to be 40-6, and I'd be talking about Brady's 3 Super Bowl losses, a combined 15 points, and last night's loss for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs being 34 points. We were getting close to that territory. Here's more from Jeff Howe. If you want to have some games, if you want to play some games with people about Brady and Mahomes, and just really Brady, Jeff Howe posted this last night. Brady was 7-3 in the Super Bowl. He walked off the field in the fourth quarter or overtime with the lead in all 10 games. So in all 10 of the Super Bowls that Brady played, he walked off the field at some point, either in the fourth quarter or in overtime, with the lead in all 10 of those games. That's nuts. That is nuts. Mahomes is 3-2, of course, as we said earlier, his 2 losses by a combined 40 points. Brady found a way to always be in the game when you got to the fourth quarter, when it was the biggest game. In the Super Bowl, no matter what was happening, no matter if the defense for the Patriots was falling apart like against the Eagles, or if the offense was having issues like against the Rams a few years ago, or when they were having issues against the Giants and that defensive front, Brady always did enough to keep his team in the game. He always did enough to give his team a chance to win. And that is obvious when you read that Jeff Howe post. In every single one of the Super Bowl games Brady played in, his team had a lead in the fourth quarter or overtime in every single one of those games. Now Mahomes' 2 losses, they've been laughers. The game against Tampa a couple of years ago was a joke. That was a beatdown. Last night was a beatdown. And one person tweeted at me, man, oh man, the audacity. Crip Walking 757, so somebody from the Virginia Beach area, tweeted this at me. Only took Mahomes 7 years to have the best 3-year run by a team in league history. In due time, he will be on top. Just sit back and enjoy the run. Here was my counter to that delusional human being. Brady won 3 out of 4 Super Bowls in his first 4 years as a starter. 4 years in the league as a starter, already had 3 rings. In those 3 Super Bowls, in those 3 years, the Patriots went a combined 48-7. Then Brady went to 3 straight Super Bowls from 2016 to 2018 when he was 39 years old, 40 years old, and 41 years old. He won 2 of those Super Bowls. So Brady, at the age of 39 to the age of 41, made it to 3 straight Super Bowls, winning 2 of those Super Bowls. That's exactly what Patrick Mahomes just did. But here's the difference. In the only loss from 16 to 18 in those 3 Super Bowls, we know what happened. I mentioned it earlier against the Eagles. Brady broke the record for most passing yards in a Super Bowl with 505. He had 3 touchdowns and not a single interception. That's crazy. That's crazy. From the age of 39 to 41, he led a team to 3 straight Super Bowls. In the only game that he lost during that 3-year stretch, he threw for more than 500 yards, 3 touchdowns, and did not throw a single pick. Patrick Mahomes, his 3-year window that we just saw, made it to 3 Super Bowls, won 2 of them, but the game that he lost was last night. An embarrassment. His second worst game in his NFL career, according to QBR. Not even close, folks. Not even close. Not even close. And I don't know how anybody can even argue that it's close. The conversation is over for now. It's over with. Put it to bed. It's done. Finito. Over. If anybody brings up Brady Mahomes in the GOAT conversation, if anybody brings that up and tries to tell you that it's not Tom Brady, that person is a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Because that is the only explanation. Last night's game put a nail in that coffin, at least for now. Now, maybe, again, it's possible. Maybe Patrick Mahomes busts open that coffin and sits up like the Undertaker gif that we see on Twitter and social media. Maybe that happens. Maybe Mahomes comes back next year. He's in better shape. Kansas City makes a bunch of changes. They improve the roster. And Mahomes is on a mission, and next year he just runs through the competition, and maybe, just maybe, Patrick Mahomes leads the Chiefs to a Super Bowl next year. And we talk about him making 4 Super Bowls and winning 3 out of the 4. Maybe that's what happens. And I'll be here to talk about if that's what happens. But for now, put it to bed. It's over. Because it's also possible that Patrick Mahomes doesn't do anything after this point. It could be possible that Patrick Mahomes retires with 3 Super Bowl rings. It could be possible it takes him 8 years to get back to the Super Bowl. It might be possible it takes him a decade until he wins another Super Bowl. We don't know. But for right now, I'd rather have the Patrick Mahomes versus Joe Montana conversation than Patrick Mahomes versus Tom Brady. After last night, I think the Mahomes-Montana conversation is more interesting and fascinating and sexy than a Brady versus Mahomes. That conversation's done. I'm sure content creators around the country are hurt. Their hearts are hurting. They're very upset. Some of them might have even cried last night because of all the hot takes they lost when Patrick Mahomes laid an egg and the Chiefs got whooped. RIP to those hot takes. It's over. It's over. But let's learn a lesson from last night's game. If you're a Patriots fan, the Patriots organization, there is one clear lesson to learn from that game last night. Now that we put the Brady-Mahomes stuff to bed, we look at what you learned from that game. And what you learned from that game is that the trenches matter. And even though the trench talk isn't super sexy, it's not fantasy football, it's not talking about getting that number one receiver, your quarterback threw for 6 touchdowns, it's not up and down the field action. And some people might find talking about offensive line play as boring, defensive line play as boring. It's easy. When you can dominate in the trenches, you can dominate any team in football. It doesn't guarantee you wins. It doesn't guarantee you a Super Bowl. But if you have the kind of offensive line and defensive line play that Philadelphia had, Philadelphia, when you look at it now, in hindsight, and you go back to their bye week in week 5, they were the best team in football from their bye week until last night. And Detroit can argue about injuries they had and all of that. I understand. But Philadelphia was the most consistent, most talented, most dangerous team in the league from their week 5 bye until the end of that game last night. And it had to do with their offensive line pushing people around, creating space for Saquon Barkley, and it had to do with their pass protection, and it had to do with their ability to get to the quarterback and not having to blitz. So if we take one lesson from last night's game, it's you've got to do a lot of work, which we knew. But this highlights how much work the Patriots have to do on that defensive line and offensive line. Christian Barmore was tweeting out today an hourglass emoji. I don't know what the hell that's about. Hopefully that means he's getting close to coming back and being ready. Being ready to, be that guy that he was. But right now, I mean, you've got, hopefully, fingers crossed, Barmore. You've got Godshaw, who's a good run defender on early downs. You've got Keon White, who showed some potential as a pass rusher this past year, some impact splash plays. But you need to do a lot of work on that defensive line. You need to go out and you need to add 1, 2, 3 guys to that defensive line. You need an edge presence immediately, like right now. You need somebody on the edge who can get to the quarterback consistently. You need a guy on that defensive end where, opposing offenses have to game plan for that guy and that they're afraid of that guy. You need an offensive line that is better than what you had last year by such a gigantic margin. Now, last year you had injuries. You had the Okorafor situation. Last year's offensive line wasn't the plan. But even the planned offensive line, you need much better than the planned offensive line. You need much better than what plan A was. Offensive line, defensive line play, trenches. Patriots have to focus on it. It's got to be their number one priority. You protect the quarterback. And Mike Vrabel talked about it in his introductory press conference. He talked about getting after the quarterback, impacting the opposition's quarterback, and protecting your own quarterback. He put that out there in the introductory press conference. It was one of the first things he talked about. We need to protect our quarterback, and we need to impact the other quarterback. What he's talking about is what I'm talking about. What Mike Vrabel was talking about in his introductory press conference is what we saw play out last night. Dominant play on the line of scrimmage, offensively, defensively. You're not going to get there in one offseason. The Patriots are not going to be able to get to where Philly is in one offseason, okay? That is multiple drafts. That is a long stretch of years on that offensive line, but it's making smart decisions. Mekhi Becton, bringing him in, right? And switching him from tackle to guard worked out perfectly. Hitting on a draft pick like Mayalata in the 7th round, I think. Now one of the best left tackles in football. It's scouting, it's developing, it's drafting, it's signing guys that can work. Offensive, defensive line. That's what we learned from last night. Patriots have to show urgency addressing the line of scrimmage. And it starts right now. That game ends last night. The offseason, full swing. We're 1 month away from free agency in the tampering period. That's what we need to see, the urgency on the offensive and defensive lines. Josh Sweat last night had a hell of a game. He's going to be a free agent. You better be one of the first phone calls to Josh Sweat. You better have the Brinks truck ready. The defensive line in this year's draft is loaded. I was watching Todd McShay's podcast earlier today. He's talking about how there are guys that are going to be drafted in the 3rd round on the defensive line in this year's draft that could be starters day one. So you have it. You've got the money. There are free agents. We'll talk about these guys over the next few weeks. There are free agents in this year's class that can help you on the edge, can help you on the defensive line. You've got a very, very, very deep draft when it comes to defensive line. You need to address it. Offensive line, Mekhi Becton, who I just brought up, he's a free agent. Ronnie Stanley is a free agent. Alaric Jackson is a free agent. There are some names. If those guys get to free agency, there are legitimate starting offensive linemen, legitimate starting offensive tackles, legitimate left tackles in free agency this year. And you're going to have to overpay. You're going to have to go a little bit bananas. You're going to have to recruit guys like you're in college. You got to do everything that you can possibly do. But through free agency and through this draft, there are going to be answers for you to at least start that process of rebuilding at the line of scrimmage. You're not going to get it all done. We can't expect this team to address everything this offseason and line up a defensive line and offensive line like we saw last night from Philly. But we have to see some steps in the right direction. We have to see the start of that process. That is priority number one. And the Eagles taught us that last night. Start addressing the trenches. Start doing it right now. Click that thumbs up. Give us that thumbs up as you watch and listen. That helps us with the algorithm. Helps us get eyeballs to the product. That's how we grow. So don't forget to like this podcast. Don't forget to throw a comment in. See, Amstel says wants to trade up from 38 for a sick edge. I think you can get a really talented edge at 38, honestly, Amstel. Again, the draft is loaded on the defensive line. Now, if you wanted to move up into the 1st round to get somebody who you thought slid down the board and, is a can't-miss kind of guy, but it's loaded. You should be able to get a really talented defensive lineman at 38 if that's where you go. I mean, you got 4 picks in the top 77. You could arguably get, 2 defensive linemen out of your first 4 picks that could start for you next year. So it's deep. Tackle might not be deep. Wide receiver might not be the deepest. But if you look at, the 2 positions, there's actually 3 positions for the Patriots in the draft that have a good amount of depth. It's defensive line. It's cornerback has good depth. Tight end has really good depth. Running back is also super deep. So those 4 positions in this draft right now look really good. So I don't know if you have to move up from 38 to get a guy that can impact your defense on that defensive line in 2025. I think you can land that guy at 38. I believe you can do that. All right, like, comment, subscribe. Try to hit 6,000 subscribers by March 10th. We've got a month to do it. We can get there. Continue to push. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, fellow Patriots fans about this podcast, The Nick Cattle Show. We will be back on Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock live Eastern right here on YouTube, unless something else big breaks. If it does, we'll be all over it. But until Wednesday, hump day, everybody be well. I appreciate your support. This has been The Nick Cattle Show.